What on earth is going on in Australia? Now, some of these people at the protest yesterday are suggesting that we remove every immigrant from Australia.
By Whyte, Australia! This land was built by Whyte Australia. We want to send them back. This is our land.
Okay, so yesterday, the 31st of August, Australians marched throughout various cities in Australia, in protest of immigration. The march was purportedly to take back control of Australia, control of the land of Australia from immigrants. But not everybody, partook in that march. Not everybody supported the protests. So the big question becomes, who were those that marched? And of course, the answer is the usual suspects. Let's see Australians, say it for themselves.
What on earth is going on in Australia? Now, some of these people at the protest yesterday are suggesting that we remove every immigrant from Australia.
By Whyte, Australia! This land was built by Whyte Australia. We want to send them back. This is our land.
So let's actually break down what would actually happen if that were the case. Well, to start, nearly 30% of the Australian population was born overseas. That would mean 7.5 million people removed. Now, in healthcare, roughly 40% of doctors and 30% of nurses in Australia are foreign born. Hospitals and aged care would collapse under pressure. Farming relies heavily on seasonal and migrant workers, and without them, food shortages and price spikes would almost hit immediately. So we would expect to pay even more than we already are. Australia would face economic collapse, deep recession, mass unemployment, and housing crashes. There were some stupid people at this event, and for this idiot chanting,
"This land was built by Whyte Australia. We want to send them back. This is our land."
I mean, white Australians were never even the founders of Australia. We stole the land from Aboriginals who were the original founders. So that would mean that the people chanting "send immigrants back" are in fact immigrants themselves, of a country us white Australians actually stole. Now, in saying this, I agree that the very small minority burning Australian flags and causing chaos should be sent back. Like, if they don't respect the place that gave them safety, food, and the freedom to live in this beautiful country, they should not be here. But blaming and threatening to remove the majority of immigrants who contribute to making Australia amazing and are actually grateful to be here is definitely not the answer.
If you're so worried about immigration, why do you only ever talk about migrants from Africa and the Middle East when they do not make up the biggest countries of origin for immigration? That would be England. Why do you never talk about England? If you were so concerned about the migration problem and the numbers, you would think you would probably start with the biggest group, the group contributing the most. Do you think you would start there? So why do you never bring them up? I wonder what that might be about. Oh, head scratcher that one is, it's not, it's racism.
They're talking about immigrants, they're not talking about white South Africans and white Americans. Talking about Indians, Asians, Africans, ones which don't look like them or don't have the views or values, or maybe the Indians come and do a better job than you. You don't want to compete, bro. Simple as that. I understand you can't just let everyone come to the nation. I understand that. They're more saying that I don't have a job, or this person's willing to do it better. As a big business owner, bro, I'm not going to favor you just because you don't want to work, and now we're going to cap it so you have a say, so you can do your job really poorly. I'm trying to make money. I'm trying to make the country better.
100%. You go out there, your doctor, Asian guy. Now the truth, your accountant is the Asian guy. Those that help you stay alive is the Asian guy. like people going around beating up on Indians. Like, bro, that's your doctor. You just beat up your doctor.
When they say they want to take Australia back, I think, from who? I mean, 1 in 3 Australians today was born overseas. Is that who they mean? And when do they want to take it back to? Because pretty much everyone except First Nations people trace back to someone who came here from somewhere else at some point in our history. Which of those points do they want to go back to? And what do they want Australia to be? What is the national identity, culture, heritage, history and way of life they're protecting? Pretty sure it's not Indigenous. But if the whole history of Australia post-colonisation has been about waves of immigrants, then isn't that actually who and what we are? Now, we can absolutely have a conversation about what it means to be Australian today. But if your version of that conversation is going to a rally organised by people telling you to rise up and take Australia back from immigrants in a country where nearly all of us are either immigrants or the descendants of immigrants, then it doesn't really matter why you say you're there. What matters is why the people organising it say you're there.
Australia doesn't have an issue with mass migration. Australia does have an issue with education, corporate greed, and work ethic, which is what led to the August 31st protest happening. There are many people that are not well versed in economic policy, economic theory, or even understanding how Australia's tax system works, and they need to blame someone for their lack of success. The media piggyback on this because the media is owned by individuals or groups who hoard a lot of wealth and a lot of vacant properties in this country. And they don't want the average Australian blaming them because they want to maintain power. So it's easy to blame migrants because migrants are the ones doing the jobs and doing the work to get the jobs that others aren't willing to do, which in turn is seen as success because they are your GPs, they are your surgeons, they are your academics at university. People aren't willing to do the work. They've got a poor work ethic. So we're going to blame migrants, but migrants are not the ones hoarding thousands, tens of thousands of properties or Airbnbs. It's not a mass migration issue.
For context, let's understand, the history of Australia. So how was Australia born?
Australians. We need to talk really quickly. Why are you being fake? Now, you're all up in the air and going crazy about immigration, saying, why are we letting in all these people when we're not looking after our own? While I agree with what you're saying, why are you complaining about immigration when you're an immigrant yourself? It's like have a taste of your own medicine situation this is, isn't it? Because remember what you did to the indigenous people of this land. You came here unwelcomed, forced your way of life on indigenous people, mass ethnic cleansing on First Nations people, and 200 years later you're all complaining about a new set of immigrants. You're both equal in this situation. The people you're complaining about, they're on equal status as you. Right? That's why you see indigenous people not engaging in the 31st of August, because it's like a pack of immigrants crying around in the street. It's like, now you understand how we feel, isn't it? Don't you? To all my mob out there, throw your flag over your shoulder and put it right in their face, because the fact of the matter is, if you truly want unity, you have to accept the truth of this country. Stop being a fake Australia, a fake British colony. It is what it is. I'm just not lying to you. I'm telling the truth, and that's why you can't handle Kangaroo Jack, because I'm laying it down on the line to you. Nothing.
They said Australia was peacefully settled in 1788, but they didn't tell us. It was a military invasion. We were taught about the First Fleet, not the first shots fired on Aboriginal land. We memorized the names of Cook, Phillip, Macquarie, but not Pumulwi, who led a 12-year resistance war against British forces in Sydney. We heard about Burke and Wills, but not about the hundreds of massacre sites across the country. They taught us about Federation, Anzacs, explorers, but not about the stolen generations. Not about the protection acts that gave governments the right to take children, just for being Aboriginal. We weren't told that Australia's original nations had their own governments, languages, medicine, and law systems. Long before the British arrived. They called it discovery, but it was destruction. They called it civilization, but it was colonization. The truth is, Australia didn't begin in 1788. It began over 65,000 years ago. But until schools start telling that truth, we're not remembering history, we're repeating the lie.
Okay, so for context, the first white people to set foot in Australia were actually criminals. Australia was a prison for Britain. It was where convicted criminals were dumped or shipped to, and the ship left without them, so they never came back to the United Kingdom. In this land of Australia were indigenous people called the Aborigines. And over time, with the increase of the population of these criminals, they were able to organize themselves and take over the land of Australia from the indigenous people, the Aborigines who were living there. So what about the indigenous people? What happened to the people that were there before the convicts were brought in? The Aborigines, what is their story?
When people talk about Australia, they love to highlight the beaches, the accents, the kangaroos. But you rarely hear them talk about the blood beneath the soil. Because Australia is just like the US. It wasn't discovered. It was invaded. And the first thing they tried to do was wipe the oldest living culture off the face of the earth. So let's back up for a second. The Aboriginal people of Australia have been on that continent for 65,000 years. Let that sit. They are the oldest continuous culture on Earth. Not only did they live in harmony with the land, they had complex languages, spiritual systems, astronomy, trade, and none of it was savage or primitive. But when the British showed up in 1788, they saw none of that. They saw a land they wanted and people they thought didn't count. So they claimed the land as nobody's land, like people weren't already living there. And what followed was centuries of massacre, displacement, slavery, and dehumanization. Aboriginal people were hunted like animals. Entire tribes were wiped out. Their water sources were poisoned. Children were taken. Women were assaulted. Men were imprisoned, sometimes for just being Aboriginal. Their language banned. Their cultural practices outlawed. Their sacred land stolen. They weren't even considered full citizens on their land until 1967. Let me repeat that. The original custodians of that land weren't counted as people until less than 60 years ago. And from the late 1800s to the 1970s, the government had a plan to breed out the black. That's not an exaggeration, that's what they actually called it. They took thousands of Aboriginal children from their families, the stolen generation, and placed them in white homes or church institutions. Sound familiar? They erased their names, told them their families didn't want them. And when those children cried for their mothers, nobody came. Because colonialism isn't just about land, it's about memory. And they were trying to erase it all. So when you hear people talk about Australia like it's just another Western paradise, know this: there's blood in the soil and trauma in the air. And the world is still catching up to the truth. Because Aboriginal people didn't just survive genocide, they preserved the oldest culture on the planet through it. And that's resistance. That's legacy. That's a miracle that colonizers couldn't kill, no matter how hard they tried.
For most of Australia's history, Aboriginal people were invisible. Not by accident, but by law. The original Australian Constitution said this: "In reckoning the numbers of the people, Aboriginal natives shall not be counted." That meant no census, no legal rights, no say in the policies that governed their lives. The oldest living culture on Earth was legally written out of existence. Then came 1967, a national referendum. 2 questions, but only one that would echo through history. Should Aboriginal Australians be counted as citizens? Should they finally be seen, on paper, in law, as people? On May 27, 1967, over 90% of Australians voted yes. The highest yes vote in any Australian referendum ever. But this wasn't a gift. It was the result of decades of activism, marches, tears, and the unshakable strength of a people who refused to be erased. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the pain. But it cracked open the silence, and it forced a country to see its first people. This was more than a vote. It was a line in the sand.
That's it.